All right, everybody. I want to welcome Trent to I think we're on the 11th episode of the Wandering Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Samietti Jr. And for those who don't know, the Wandering Thoughts podcast is a place where I can sit down with guests or friends or just myself and hash out thoughts and ideas and things that go on in the real world. Great way to have discussions, I think, especially if you get to know the person during the podcast, the person you're interviewing. Trent Gander I'm quite pleased to have him with me today. He runs a blog. He's a bit of a freelancer himself. The intro that his whole bit that he sent me to try and get on the podcast was quite fascinating, and I'll read that after he introduces himself a bit more efficiently. But Trent, I'm glad to have you here.
I'm glad to be here. Okay, so hi, I'm Trent. I run a life blog called the Gentleman's University of Manliness. I am the irreverent gentleman there. I write freelance copywriting, which is I write blogs, emails, ads, pretty much anything that you need for your website or for your business. And I do it pretty decently. I want to make sure that the people who do hire me for that get the most out of what they pay me. It's early in the morning. I've had a little bit of a rough night. But either way, if you're interested in that, you can contact Joseph and he can contact me and we'll get you taken care of. Either way, I try to get people to have the mental tools that they need in order to survive in the modern world. And there's really too little of that today. A little too much shallow thinking and not enough deep thinking about how we're supposed to live our lives and how we're going to make it to tomorrow.
Is that why you started the blog then to help people? Or
That was the basic concept, because my brother, he can sometimes be a little socially awkward. And it's like, you know what? There's a lot of people who are socially awkward. I want to help them with their social skills. And so I started the blog. It went from okay, how to talk to people, how to schmooze, and how to interface with them in such a good and beneficial way. Then it turned into, well, I'm seeing a lot of things that I was taught not being taught to other people. So I started to share the information and stuff that I was figuring out and that I was taught, and grew to find be an answer to many questions that were out there. That's like, okay, we got to keep putting information, good information out, so that the next generation will be better than us and even help the current generation, so that we don't see a death spiral of both culture and civilization.
right. So what do you think is leading to this death spiral? Because if we look at the Western culture as a whole, it's rapidly draining itself without thought or care for the fact that once it's into the drain, it's very hard to come back up.
Well, that is a very difficult question because it doesn't come from one single source. It comes from a multitude of different avenues, most of which came about from the 1960s with the sexual revolution and concepts that were found and advocated by Soviet communists. But that's an entirely different story for another day. For the most part, today, we're seeing, I would say, a lack of spirituality. I'm not talking about people being into spiritual things, because we've got a lot of that, but the average individual, and at least the feel that I get when I look at social media, is that there's just a bunch of super empty people who are looking for something to fill that hole. It's the classic Christian thing, is like, you need God in your life, otherwise something's going to replace it. And I think that's extremely true, because many other religions other than Christianity are pointing this out to the West, and they're just like, no, that's just archaic BS. We're not going to deal with that. But yet the consumerism is growing, and the concern over the environment is growing, and it's growing so proportionately that it's starting to become something like a religion to them. And they're putting something that's not necessarily a greater calling or a greater individual, a greater being in that place. And we see them getting essentially cheap alternatives, something that's not as fulfilling as some of the older religions and some of the older spiritual ideas that used to be so prevalent that really got us to where we were as the pinnacle of the world. And as that continues to happen, I'm wondering how many people are going to like pull away from the vacuum within themselves and think, what is the problem? How can we solve that? And where they'll find those solutions. But if we continue with the way social media is going, we're going to find people are just going to go deeper down the chute and not really understand what's going on and just wonder why their life is so crappy.
Right. It's I've heard a lot of the I wouldn't say the greatest thinkers of our time because they often speak just common sense.
Mm,
Things like, well, Jordan Peterson's clean your room, take responsibility for yourself. Um,
mm.
Things like that. Like to a lot of people, that's revolutionary. But in reality, go back 100 years ago, and that was, hey, you're expected to do this. You better do it or else. But a lot of them, they tend to point out things like atheism or science or even things like uh, Islam or I don't remember the name of the other one because just all that's combined is Buddha, and I'm like, that's not the name of
Buddhism.
it. Yeah, Buddhism.
Buddhism.
Okay, so I was right. Okay, I'm
It's
always like
close.
Buddhism
It's really
seems
close.
too like
On
an
the
American thing
nose.
to say instead of
Yeah.
because like it's we call them Muslims, but they practice Islam,
Mm,
and so like I was thinking like down those lines.
mm.
Um, but then if you go to countries like China or India or Africa, you see Christianity is exploding, and you wonder why because they're a lot of massive parts of those continents and countries are just third world countries. You'd think that they would be turning towards things that would bring them riches, things like science, things like atheism, where the whole pursuit is do what you can today because there is no tomorrow. Like if you die, you're dead and you're done and there's nothing left. So do anything you can to make your life better now. And there are tons of other pseudo religions out there, just revolving around things like the pursuit of money, the pursuit of happiness, hedonism, things like that. But in the Western culture, we see, I think it's mainly just science and atheism. And then lately it's been COVID too. Like that's been kind of insane to see how divided and spiritual, I guess, people have been about it because it really does remind me of things like the Pentecostals versus the Baptists or Pentecostals versus the Catholic Church, where if you get two people to sit down together and they don't know how to know how to have a civil conversation, which a lot of them don't, you just like, hey, you're a Pentecostal, hey, you're a Catholic, sit down. And the Pentecostal says, well, guess what? God is so great. He healed me of my broken knee. The Catholics seem like, excuse me, miracles don't happen very often. Did a priest do this? It's going to be a conflict where it's like my belief is my belief, and it has to be true. And we we've reached COVID over the past, I don't know, almost has it been?
It's been almost 2 years now.
Yeah.
It's going into 3.
Yeah, because it started technically December of 2019. September.
Mm,
I think people dated as far back as September of
yeah.
2019. And as Stephen Crowder says a lot, he's and now we're nearing 2 years of 15 days to slow the spread.
Mhm.
Which is that in and of itself is interesting that other countries have done things that are absolutely hard, but their people are standing up for the fact that it's absolutely hard. Like Germany,
Mm.
Australia, Austria a
Places you
bit.
wouldn't think that they would happen. I remember I have a decent friend that I've met online. He's a native of Belgium, and they had a protest against some of the protocols and things in Belgium. You don't hear about Belgium in the news, but
Mm,
yet something like that's happening. Americans are portrayed as being the knuckle dragging thugs of the world. We'll throw a fist before we say a kind word, and then we have people fighting in Europe where we think that they're extremely advanced and civilized.
mm.
Well, we're just the barbarians of the modern age.
Well, not just that, but it's interesting to point out that there is a distinct lack of protest in the United States over the lockdowns and the mandates, which I think honestly, like unless there's something that I'm missing, like a news story that I missed or something like that,
There
I haven't
are
seen very
actually
many.
there are actually a decent number of rallies. However, since they are more political in nature, like think it was a week or two ago, somebody I technically work with was attending I believe, a Latin exit protest in Arizona. But there are actually a number of like small groups or large groups of people protesting the lockdowns, but it's not televised because that's not the story. The
Right.
story is how you're going to die from this brand new variant of COVID. And because it doesn't benefit the mainstream media in that way, it's not going to be talked about, which I think is actually very sad because one of the other things that we have is people are using the legal routes because we have more court-based things in the U.S. compared to Europe, because Europe is very uh, dictatorial in its behavior. It's like you're going to do this and you're going to like it,
Mhm.
compared to us, where it's like, well, I have rights. My legal rights state this, and the precedent in the courts state this. I can tell you to take a hike legally
Yep.
with precedent.
Yeah, the Supreme Court just did that to Biden, which I got to be honest, I'm surprised that that actually went through. The fact that the Supreme Court blocked uh, the OSHA bit, but not the mandate for healthcare workers.
Mm.
But it is interesting. Like if you go to Australia, you don't have those rights. You don't have the right to say, "Hey, this is my business. You're a cop. You can't come in here without a warrant." I'm not entirely clear on how Australia's government works, but I do know it doesn't appear that they have the same rights as we do regarding the ability to protest without being arrested. And by protest, I mean a peaceful protest, not like the peaceful ones that happened over the past summer, but the peaceful ones where people get together, they have signs, they're chanting something. Maybe there's somebody who's speaking to them, trying to fire them up, be like, yeah, we're not quitting even though it's cold out, things like that. Whereas I think in Australia, I don't know how much of a right they have for that, especially since they aren't an armed populace. So if something does go down, what are they
Yeah.
gonna do? Smack people with pots and pans? That doesn't work
Well,
very well.
the thing of it is, because I have a friend in Australia, and
Mhm.
there are firearms in Australia, but they're not necessarily to the level that we would accept as normal in the US. So
Right.
we're talking like old hunting rifles, old shotguns, maybe a couple of
Yeah,
handguns.
things you would use
Uh,
on a farm or if you went hunting or something.
yeah, they're more utilitarian, and even then, some of the lobbies against firearms in Australia are trying to get rid of those as well, because uh, one of the things that they stated was you can blow away a feral hog with ease with a shotgun. Meanwhile, they're being overrun by feral hogs and mice and all these other things that are really destroying their infrastructure and
Yeah.
their food producing abilities. So it's this strange disconnect between how I want to say it's I generally refer to it as Gaiaism, worship of nature,
Mhm.
or deification of animals. It's like this extreme version of we cannot kill any single animal because that's wrong, compared to I'm sorry, Fuzzy, but you're starting to threaten not only my livelihood, but also my means of producing food. So I have to make sure you stay out in nature and out of my crops.
Right. I was having there's a Discord server I'm in that me and a couple of friends run.
Mm,
Uh, and it's just nature based because a lot of my friends and I we really love science, we really love nature.
mm,
But all my friends are Christians, and not to take shots at a lot of Christians these days, but not the weak spined, the lack of a true thought Christians. We think things through. Uh, we're all pretty conservative based, just because that to us that's common sense.
mm,
Um, and none of us. I mean, some don't get me wrong. I've often fallen into the trap of, well, nature's so romantic, it's amazing, it's so beautiful, and humans are the main issue. But I can't help but look back at what nature really is and how it acts and what it does. A lot of people, for example, a lot of people love dolphins.
mm.
Dolphins are one of the meanest,
Yeah.
cruelest creatures on the planet.
They
They
will
get
try to have sex with everything that moves
yeah, they
without
will
consent.
anybody, no matter the age, not like and a lot of people are like, well, dolphins save humans. Dolphins kill more humans than they save. In fact, a lot of times the only reason why they save humans is because they're playing with them right before they kill them, and then they're like, "Oh, it's the shore," and the human's like, "Yay, dolphin, yes!" And and gets off, and the dolphin's like, "I didn't say you could leave," but the dolphin can't,
Yeah.
climb on land.
Yeah.
But I was apparently down in Florida over the past 2-3 weeks, a tagger was a cleaner man. His job, he was hired as a third-party source to come and clean various aspects of the zoo. He decided to try and pet the tagger after closing hours, and the tiger latched onto his arm, because that's what a big predator does. It says, I'm hungry, or I'm just in the mood to kill something. Here's a human. I'm gonna do what I can. The sheriff's office came. They tried to pry the tiger's jaws. It wouldn't work, so they had to kill it. Several people in the Discord server that I'm in, they posted the story, and being me, I just like, okay, so why is this a big deal? I get it. It's kind of sad that the tiger got killed, but I value human life more. And the people I was discussing with, they all value an animal's life over humans, and that got me thinking, what happened to the morality and just the sanctity of human life? Why has that been so utterly destroyed? I mean, go back 100 years ago and people were saying, yeah, screw that lion, man, he attacked me, kill him.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say it's connected to spirituality as a whole, but I think the further we get from God, the closer we have to get to other gods, whether it be nature, science, COVID, things we mentioned earlier. And the closer you get to those things, the further you get from just morality. And regardless of how anybody thinks of sin, morality is still an objective fact. If you rape a 9-year-old, that is immoral. You belong to be in jail. And this one I'm not sure about, because I don't like killing people, and given the death sentence. Similarly, the fact that morals have degraded is an interesting thing to look at, I think.
The actually interesting thing is, I was having this discussion in my weekly Bible study yesterday, is that it's strange that hardcore criminals, people who are in prison, who are divided by race because of necessity, seem to have a greater grasp of morals than a lot of people who are out in the street. I was listening to, I forget, Wes something. He runs a YouTube channel, and he talks about his time in prison, and he was being interviewed on Fresh Out with Big Herc. And they were asked, like, what's some of the things that go on? I says, well, since he was with the Aryan Brotherhood, because he's white, and that's the major faction for the whites in prison. Right. He says, we check to see if you were a child molester. We check to see if you did anything to women, and if we find anything with that, we send somebody after you, either to mark you or kill you or something else. And it's just how it is. And it's strange to think that people who do bad things are in prison for years at a time have a greater sense of that is beyond the pale of acceptable behavior, and we're going to correct this in a very definitive manner. Right. But when we have people like here, it's like, no, it's not that bad. I'm sorry, traumatizing a child, we do that enough just with our school systems and everything else, and it has nothing to do with sexual trauma, even though it's greatly increased in public schools.
Yeah, 11-year-olds having sex.
We're having all these troubles. It's like, listen, if you're a kid, you have a right to be a kid. You shouldn't have to worry about sexual predators and all these other things going on. You're just trying to get to the point where you can be an adult and survive. And then people say, you know what? It's okay for you to be traumatized. Like, no, it's not. Trauma's going to happen. We're going to have to teach people how to deal with it. Yes. But to be so naive to think that that is not falling to us to protect our children. I don't have kids. I'm not married. I don't have a girlfriend. I don't have any of that. But it's like, listen, I dislike kids on video games when I'm trying to play an adult video game or something else. And it's just like, hey, where's the call out? It's like, child, I don't want to deal with you right now. I really don't. I'm sure you're a horrible child in person, but I just don't want to deal with you. However, right. I don't think that kid should be molested. I don't think that. That is just like probably the worst thing to happen to anyone, no matter the age. And to think that people are okay with it, it doesn't sit well with me at all. And it's sad that we've gotten to that point in the West.
Yeah, especially since lately a big part of the LGBTQ plus movement has been allowing pedophilia to be a thing that's accepted and right. And that's been disgusting to watch slowly unfold. Like, it hasn't really broken major headlines, but I saw a few headlines.
There's a few things we're starting to crest a little bit, and I know a number of people who are part of the LGBTQ community. I can 3 people I hang out regularly are part of it.
Mhm.
They don't necessarily believe in God or specifically, but they are absolutely against pedophilia.
Right.
And I do not doubt in my mind that should something like that happen or they see it, they would take action. And it goes to show us that not every group is 100% directed toward the same goal, but we are also seeing a degradation of a group and how things can start to take hold, and an internal rot will crop up and uh, take down the entire organization if you want to consider it an organization.
But I mean, you could, I mean, they have the pride flag flying in places like California. They have entire rally. They have an entire month set aside for
Yeah,
them nationally, and that in and of itself, to me, that I found that interesting. That like there's an entire month set aside for a bunch of gay people, whereas our veterans get one day. You know,
yeah, yeah. So the funny thing of it is that the most of the thrust of the LGBTQ community is to be accepted as normal,
mhm,
be accepted as part of society, and I really find at this point in time, well, I don't necessarily advocate for the LGBTQ community. I just think people shouldn't be killed for their beliefs or
yeah,
their stances on things, but I don't necessarily condone the LGBTQ community. But if you're normal, you shouldn't be having an entire month dedicated to who and what you are.
yeah.
It's like we just accept you as part of the culture, and we hang out with it. It's like you know what you need to know that I'm gay. It's like
That
I
chopped off
didn't need
my
to know
penis
that.
to become a woman.
I didn't need to know that, bro. But
Exactly.
thanks. Like, well, one of I always consider them a good friend. They are transitioning male to female,
Hmm.
and we have an understanding. I don't necessarily support it, but I understand that that's their personal choice.
Right.
And there are things that straight people do that I don't condone. And there are things that gay and trans people do that I don't condone, but they have to make that choice. I think that's one of the things that we're missing in the West because we were founded on the concept of individual choice.
Hmm.
That is, you have a certain set of rights. You can choose to destroy yourself, you can choose to build yourself up. But as we're to actually get back to what brought us into this conversation was that we're starting to see the idea that you don't have a personal choice, that you don't have any right to say, you know what, that's bad for me, or I'm not sold on using a particular product or service or anything else. And I'm going to wait. I'm going to look at my options, and maybe I won't even consider using whatever is being pushed at me because, of course, one of the things that have been extremely large in the last 2 years has been a push for the vaccine for COVID. And there's this probably every other ad on YouTube, every other ad on the radio, on TV,
TV.
on even things that get the COVID shot. It's like,
Mhm.
what happens if I don't want to? So, well, then you don't believe in science. It's like, listen, I know that there's people who are allergic to penicillin,
Mhm.
and it is one of the best antibacterial substances around. However, if I know I'm allergic to penicillin and someone says, you know what, this is a great thing, I'm going to give it to you. No, please don't. I go into anaphylactic shock and die. The choice, the clear choice from medical professionals is apply penicillin when there's a bacterial infection. Well, meanwhile, it's like, hey, I've had bad stuff with this in the past. I know that I'm allergic to that, but conventional wisdom states that I should be given this thing that's bad for me, that I know is bad for me, because of a medical physician maybe not checking my medical history. Because we've had that. Medical malpractice is a thing. It's $1 million industry,
Yeah.
and it's such a nuanced thing that people want to paint with broad strokes on a lot of stuff. And sometimes we have to. We can't get specifics on everything, but we should be able to accept that there are sometimes exceptions to those broad strokes. And sometimes we need a little finer detail in the research and the practice of what we do compared to just take whatever's the newest thing.
Right. It's really interesting that we've come so far regarding the mandates. Like go back to March of 2020. And what did we have? We had, hey, please, guys, we don't know what this is. Give us 15 days to figure it out.
Yeah.
And at first, just going on a timeline here. When I first heard about COVID, I was kind of afraid, especially when they came out with the, well, if you have asthma, you're at risk, because I have at least moderate asthma,
Mhm.
and like it's not something that's really noticeable unless I go for a run, and then I'm like, I can't breathe for like
Yeah.
5 minutes. So it's not like I'm like dying if I don't have an inhaler or whatever. But I was like, well, if I get COVID, I could die. But then that 15 days turned into 2 months, and as we got further along, I started to doubt it a bit, especially since a lot of my more left-leaning friends, and this is not to knock them at all, but they were like really hyped up on COVID's terrifying. We need to stay inside, not socialize or anything. And as I got to know my more conservative friends, they were like, "Well, here's an information that you probably never saw before." And I was like, "Huh, that doesn't line up with anything the CDC has said." And as I
Yeah.
went down that path, like I stopped tracking the deaths and everything like that, because it was going more from I should care about everything that's happening because it's dangerous, to I don't care. I need to just be able to live my life, do what I need to
Yeah.
do. Now here we are 2 years later, where places like Quebec have instituted fines on people who don't get vaccinated. Austria just made it so that it's a mandatory vaccine for everybody. Else, I think it's jail time or a fine. Australia, we all know how Australia did a 4-day, I believe, lockdown on all the people who weren't vaccinated about a week ago, where if the only three things they were allowed to do is go food shopping, get medical attention, and help a friend or family member who can't take care of themselves. They weren't allowed to go out for a jog, a walk, or go to work. And to me, that blows my mind. Like, okay, sure, let's say this is 4 days. I don't trust that it would last for 4 days. And if it did, that's almost a miracle in and of itself, because nothing has
Mm.
lasted for the time that people have said it's going to. But the
Mm.
issue with that for me is you're choosing to pick on a group that decided, hey, we don't trust a vaccine that took 9 months to make. We don't trust it. Can you please just let us live our lives, given the vaccine isn't super effective, given we're on what, the fourth booster now, and COVID itself isn't incredibly deadly anymore. We've seen it go from COVID, the original, where it was like killing everybody, to Omicron, which is so incredibly contagious, but also incredibly not deadly. Like, as
Yeah.
far as I know, there wasn't any information on, like, not a single person had been on a ventilator from Omicron. Whether that's true or not, I still would say that very few have, given the way the virus works. Yet governments are still saying you have to get vaccinated, you have to wear a mask, you have to social distance. We're 2 years into it. We don't know when this is going to end, and just I don't know why people seem to think it's okay to be indefinitely listening
In limbo.
to, yeah, why would you want to just constantly be doing the same thing over and over again in fear, just because the government says, hey, you should do this? How many times, like, just looking back in American history, how many times did we almost revolt against our own government because they lied to us? The Spanish
Oh, a
American
lot.
War, the World War I and II. Like, we literally had our entire population was like, no, we shouldn't go to war. Something happened, they were like, why aren't you guys going to war yet? Like, or why did you go to war? Or look back at any single war we had, and there was just massive conflict and revolution and rebellion regarding, well, revolution doesn't make sense there. Rebellion regarding what a government decision was. And it, like, LGBTQ, like, a lot of people like Trump's a freaking, he's, he doesn't like gays. He's homophobic. And it's like, he made it more legal. Now, I don't support Trump in about a lot of things he does. Do I think he was a good president regarding taxes and money? Yes. Was there a lot of things he did that I didn't agree with? Yes. Uh, but still, like, just using him as a point. Whereas you go back to previous presidents before him, whether Republican or Democratic, and they were like, well, gays shouldn't be allowed to be gays, so ban. And
Yeah.
it's just interesting that people who literally go back 10 years ago couldn't trust the government as far as they could throw them are now willing to risk everything because the government says the
Yeah.
virus is dangerous. And I don't understand. I've come up with a few things, like maybe it's a fear thing where they decide that fear is better. So because I want safety and comfort, I'm going to listen to somebody who's going to take care of me. Maybe it's an authority complex where they believe that I don't know what I'm talking about. So because the government has told me and the media has told me for so long that there's just false truths out there, I'm just going to listen to the government because, the government typically knows best, which nobody ever said
So,
and agreed with.
so you remember that conversation I said that talk about the 60s was another day? Today's another day, and there's only been like 40 minutes.
Hmm.
So one of the things that you'll continually notice in countries that adopt communism and socialism is that you experience what is known as deification of the state. The state becomes a god in and of itself, and those representatives that are in government are then deified to the point that they have become, we'll say, Christs unto themselves.
Well, North Korea, they have to worship the statues of Kim Jong Un. Like they have like that when he
It's
walks by, they
compulsed.
have to pray to him and things like that.
And deification of men has been around for long as mankind has been. We've had the god emperors, we've had the divine right of kings, we had all these things as the people in authority are representatives of God.
Mhm.
And to an extent, you can have the argument for that because we see in, at least in the Christian Bible, we see that when Daniel's talking to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar says, God sets up kings and he takes down kings. He puts people in the positions that they are. And when we see that, there's obviously some sort of purpose as to why those individuals have been put there. But when people start to put themselves in those positions, we see bad things start to happen. And
Right,
as we see COVID continue to grow, what have we seen? We've seen the expansion of the state's authority over your life,
right.
not everyone else's life, but your life in particular. And it creates such a problem when God is questioned. It goes to what actually got me on this podcast, which is the new religion that is COVID.
Hmm.
I remember when COVID was first starting out, we were starting to hear the small whispers of there's a disease going on that started to hit Hong Kong as they're trying to not be taken over by China. And in my own state of Illinois, there was a town probably 3 to 4 hours south of me, and there was a mayor said, you know what, or she said, you know what, we're going to restrict the sale of firearms and ammunition, and there's only a certain amount of gas that you can purchase. And where everyone's like,
Huh.
what the heck? This is before any of the lockdowns. This
Right.
is probably 1 or 2 weeks from the first thing is, hey, there's starting to be a problem with some sort of disease that's coming out of China, and we need to keep an eye on it. 2 weeks later, I cannot buy more than 2 leg quarter packages of chicken at my local grocery store. There's a limit on canned goods. There's a limit on beef, and I'm in the middle of the breadbasket of the United States,
Right.
and then it just keeps going from there. Then there was the absolutely amazing thing of uh the this little signs on the floor which way you can walk. And it's like, dang, we're back to shamanism. If you walk this way in this particular thing, you will not get COVID. That doesn't make any sense. If
Right,
you
'cause you
have
have to
this
pass those
magical
people anyway.
talisman,
Yeah.
yeah, if you have this magical talisman, you will not get COVID. If you say this certain prayer, you will not get COVID. It's like, this is actual shamanism in practice. We have fallen so far away from the quote unquote enlightened versions of both science and the enlightened versions of religion that we have returned to some of the most basic spiritual practices of mankind,
Hmm.
which is the local spirits will protect me, the magic tree will protect me, and the little thing that I've carved a face on will protect me from all that is evil as I go on my journey to the
Hmm.
store.
As long as I sacrifice to it and offer it all that is my being, then I should be safe.
Exactly, and it's fascinating from a I forget the name of it, from studying societies from a
Right.
societal perspective. It's great. From a personal perspective, it's freaking awful.
Yes, it is.
So one of the things that I like to do, I run tabletop RPGs for people, things like Dungeons and Dragons and other stuff, and I have to
Hmm.
think about what does a culture have. So most cultures you'll find will have some sort of religion. There's going to be a deity or one or more, and there's going to be something that is considered extremely important. And as we see today, COVID is starting to become that important, pivotal thing in every single aspect of at least American life. And
Yeah.
I can't say for anything, but from what I hear, it seems like it's also a major part in Europe and Australia as
Canada as
well.
well.
But we don't really hear anything about the Middle East, China, and places that are not the West.
Right.
I have no answers as to why, other than that we don't have access to their media, and they probably don't want us to.
Well,
But
I mean, for starters, China in and of itself, that China's been slowly closing off from the world for the past decade. It's taken massive leaps over the past year regarding, screen time, what people allowed to watch, what's allowed in their country. They
mhm.
banned Shang-Chi, one of the latest Marvel movies, from the country. Uh, I think they don't want Western cultural influence anymore, because Western influence means rebellion, and rebellion means overthrowing of a regime. Um, but it is interesting that the Middle East, we don't hear a lot about it. Maybe because there's something going on there that the media doesn't want us to hear, or
Well, there's also
maybe,
the fact that the Middle East is a legitimate human time capsule. There are
yeah,
certain places there where it's like it has not changed since the time of the Crusades.
hmm
And that's not necessarily saying that everything that they do is bad. It's just that they're just living their lives. They're living their culture out, and not necessarily enjoying it, but they are who they are
right,
without compromise. And that used to be like a hard-held American value. It's like you are you. No one else can be you. Essentially, do what you want to the best of your ability.
right,
And now it's you aren't you. You are mine. You are one of the people who are either going to be killing other people because you're not wearing a mask, or you are one of the greatest superheroes of the age because you care about other people. And it's like, if we, I've seen this a lot in the first year of COVID. People can compare to all the stuff that was happening with the government and stuff. Like, if this was a human individual, if this was like a church or anything else, they'd be either labeled a cult or an abusive spouse.
right.
And that how clearly they line up with each other, it's one scary and somewhat amusing at the same time, because it seems like the people who advocate tolerance and acceptance are the least tolerant, accepting people. And it's that little twist of irony where it's just like, ah, yes,
Yeah,
because I believe that an all-powerful deity cares about me and I should live according to his rule set. I'm a disgraceful bigot and I just want to be left alone. But Joe Schmo over there, who decides to drink himself into oblivion every single night, uh, but he wears a mask when he goes out. He's the pinnacle of moral authority, and we should all strive to be like him. Leave me alone. I just want to be left alone. I think that's a lot of people today.
I was going to say a lot of people, especially conservative groups, they're fed up with big government. They're fed up with, let's be honest, they're fed up with the lack of morality in the country. When God goes, so does the culture,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and they just want to be left alone. I just want to be left. I want to be able to go in a store without feeling like somebody's going to be looking at me and be like, "Hey, where's your mask, dude?" Like I live in New Jersey, which means
Oh
I
wow.
deal with yeah, a lot of the and the place I work at, as Omicron has become more of a thing, people have started wearing their masks more. I don't care. I have to wear a mask as an employee. It's required, else I get fired. So I
Mm-hmm,
do what I have to do.
mm-hmm,
But there was a time I was keeping track of who came in with a mask and who didn't, just like tally marks of like
mm-hmm,
how many people. And
mm-hmm.
people without masks beat out the people with, but only by like a barely like a 60-40 margin, just barely.
That's
Um,
that's weird because that's roughly about how much I notice around here now. Is the same thing. And I mentioned I live in Illinois. Illinois is very
mhm,
blue. There's so much emphasis on getting the vaccine and wearing masks. And uh, in the town that I generally shop in,
mhm,
for the longest time, there was just mask, 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 mask. You might have seen one out of every 10 people.
mhm.
And it was usually a guy or like a really old woman. Like you could
Right.
see that he was rough and tumble when she was a lot younger. Like she's not here for your crap today.
Mhm.
But now recently, I've say in the last 6 months, it's 50-50, 40-60 in favor of people not wearing masks.
Right.
And then you'll see this like somebody I saw at the store last Wednesday when I went out. Face mask, plastic gloves, to open their car, and they're out and it's like, okay, okay,
Yeah.
that is completely your choice. I think it's freaking weird, but that is your choice, my
I've
dear.
where I work, I've seen several people come in with the double mask and the gloves. or people just driving down the road in their cars with a mask on. Like if you drive an Uber, you're required by Uber to wear a mask.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a little bit less judgment for those people, a little bit less, but you still have your rights.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's what gets me every time is the people who walk down the street or are out hiking with a mask on. Like to me, I don't understand why you would want to do that. I mean, you're no, will you stop doing that?
Ah! Either way,
Yeah,
the,
go
the
ahead.
the thing of it is that a lot of what's going on is very strange, because there have been some people who are working out with a mask, and I think they had something with their lungs, like it collapsed or something, because they weren't getting adequate oxygen while they're exerting themselves, and
Right.
they're having to breathe through multiple layers of cloth and all these other things that are, legitimate concerns.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an interesting aspect. So one of the things I'd like to do is I like to have a broad set of information and broad hobbies. And one of the things that I like to look up is stuff about gas masks and other military related things. And if you have improper seal on a gas mask that's supposed to stop, chemical, biological threats that are a little bit larger than viruses, or sometimes even set for viruses. If you do it wrong, you can either start to rebreathe your own exhalations,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's a closed system, and you can just suffocate because you're not getting the necessary oxygen that your body needs in order to be able to function. And so when people, I remember it's like, I'm having a hard time breathing in this mask. Oh, you're just being a sissy. Look, we're showing it doesn't, here's a oxygen measuring device. See, it doesn't cover your oxygen. It's like, okay, well, you have to ask the next questions. How long have you been wearing that mask for before you put that the oxygen tester in? Are you in a highly oxygenated environment, such as many surgeons operate in when they're in the operating room, where they pump the oxygen levels up to higher than normal so that people can recover quickly and also not suffocate in a cramped room? Are you also wearing it for 2 to 3 hours to then check to see how much oxygen is behind your mask? There's all these questions that used to be considered part of science and acceptable to ask. They're now just like, shush, we do not want to hear your words, funny man. But these are like legitimate questions I had, because when I wore masks, I just had bandana, tie it up like I'm some sort of biker, and I'd go around, and it's like, you know what? I'm starting to get a little lightheaded.
Yeah.
Like I used to be a trumpet player for a youth symphony, and I have played the trumpet wrong enough that I've almost blacked out while doing it because of the pressures and other things else. And it's like, I've not been that winded in a while, but when I'm wearing like one of the little dust masks I used to wear for it, it's like I'm starting to my lungs are starting to burn, and I need to get outside
Mm-hmm.
because of this lack of oxygen. It's like I feel like I'm dying, and I'm like slowing down my breathing. I'm focusing so that it's like I'm not going to pass out in the middle of the store. I'm
Right.
not going to panic and be like, I'm dying right now. And I think when people are experiencing that, they have legitimate questions like, what's the purpose of this if I'm slowly suffocating myself for something that I've not known somebody directly to have died from?
Right.
Because I've known, I'm pretty sure I've had COVID. My family's had COVID. I've known a bunch of people who have gotten COVID who are still alive. There's only
Mm-hmm.
like two people I know who passed away from it. And I'm not saying that people who pass away from COVID are any less important than the people who haven't.
Mm-hmm.
It's a horrible thing that people have to go through. But I can only think of possibly two.
Right.
One is a friend of a friend of a friend who I've never encountered,
Mm-hmm.
and the other is more than likely one of my oldest uncles who finally gave out after 70, 80 years of living, and no one really ruled what he passed away from. Of course, we know it's probably going to be said, oh, it's COVID related.
Mm-hmm. As
And
is everything
it's
by the CDC.
oh, there's a, I forget where you can find it, but there is a press release given in Illinois by the Secretary of Health, or whatever they call them here, uh, who talks about publicly on television that the reason why we list them as COVID related deaths is because if they have COVID in their system, those are considered part of the death toll,
Right.
even if they're not directly related to the death at all. So it's very common in Chicago. Someone's gotten shot and dies. If they have COVID in their system, it is considered a COVID-related death. It's very similar to like if there is an open container in a vehicle, or if someone has a small amount of alcohol content in their blood during a crash, it is an alcohol-related crash. It really goes into all that marketing stuff I was talking about beginning. It's like you change it just enough so it's factually true, but it doesn't actually reflect what the reality is. It's like saying, well, the lockdown started in my state. Technically, with that story that I told about that's town south of me, that is technically true. But is it 100% factually true? Was it part of the first thing? Is like, oh, we're going to lock down everything. That's another thing that we're seeing a lot of in societies, that there's a lot less questioning. There's things that are true but not true, and when people start to ask questions, they get poo-pooed. They get banned, canceled. It's like, well, if you want me to understand fully the threat and the danger of this thing, you should sit down. You should explain it to me. Even if you have to go into it like I'm 5 in order to get me to understand, you should be willing to do that. I take that position with a lot of things. Like you should be able to explain the how and why you do something instead of, hey, how and why do we do that? No, shut up. You're stupid. Goodbye.
It was Albert Einstein who said essentially, and I'm going to botch this terribly, but essentially, if you can't explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old and in a way that a 5-year-old can understand it, then you need to go back to the drawing board because you don't even understand it yourself.
Exactly. There was a conversation in a group that I'm a part of, mostly for friends, and some of it had to do with dating for whatever reason. And this one woman said that she loves using big words, and there's people just come into the comments and just rip her a new one, saying that using big words does not make you smart. The smartest person that you generally encounter will use very simplistic words that will get the point across, that they understand, that you need to be able to understand it, compared to, oh, it's a plethora of platitudes and all these like really complex things. And that goes into copywriting, and that we don't want to use, unless we're going very specifically for somebody who is in a particular field, we will not use complicated words.
Right.
We have to assume that whoever we're talking to probably has about a 6th grade reading comprehension. Unless I'm going to, like, let's say we're talking particularly to lawyers or doctors, I'm going to avoid large words. I'm going to emphasize simplicity, unless I need to use in an internal term for whatever industry I'm working in. I know the people in the industry will know.
And if that's your target, then that's what matters.
Yeah. Always write to your audience. Always speak to your audience. And since we generally in podcasts and blogs and other things that we don't really know who our audience is when we just put it out there for people to see, it can apply to a lot of people. So I need as many people to be able to understand it, which is why I think I had a couple of articles on this on my blog. Like, one of the reasons why I tend not to even do light swearing in my blog is that kids need to know this, adults need to know this. I need to have it so that anyone can read this and not be like they're going to shut it off. Of course, kids these days swear like sailors in ways that I would be completely reprimanded for when I was a kid. Like I got reprimanded just for using the term hell a couple of times, or maybe a little too much when I'm like 10 or so. And today people are dropping F-bombs all over the place, racial slurs out the ass, and it's just like, does this really, what does this get for you? It's right. Like cheating in video games. I don't get it. Why?
Well, I think people cheat in video games because they aren't good enough to win, and so they have to feel good about themselves somehow. So they manage to hack the client. They manage to get in, so they therefore get the attention that they need. That's another thing. A lot of people just really need human attention, and I've been trying to work my way out of that, like where I need human validation for my things to be considered good, like a photograph, or because I'm a photographer or something I write, things like that. It's like, well, do you think it's good? And they're like, yeah, it's great. And I'm like, no, it's not. You're lying to me.
Yeah, there is a need for validation, and there is a need for human interaction, which is one of the reasons why we saw with the lockdowns, suicide rates started to climb, especially among young children, because we have created a very strange social experiment in regards to public schooling, where we stick a bunch of people who are all the same age, and we keep them together for hours at a time for
8 hours a
years of their
day. Yeah.
life.
Mhm.
And there's actually an interesting study because I was homeschooled,
Yeah.
so I didn't have to deal with bullies and all that other stuff. I just had to deal with my own thoughts. But they found that homeschoolers were better adjusted for things like college because they experienced interacting with people of a wider age demographic than people in high schools and public schools, because they knew how to interact with people who are, when I was growing up, a lot of my friends, or actually my parents' friends, are people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And every so often I'll encounter maybe someone who's like 13 or 14, someone around my age. But then it's like most of the people I'm hanging out with are my brother who's 10 years older than me, or my parents' friends. And it gave me a really good perspective on life because you have all that experience. And then as you start to grow, you realize that as a kid, people really don't take you as seriously, even if you might have a good idea. It's like you have to earn your stripes in regards to what you're doing. And I had to work from that for a long time because I started my blog when I was just getting into my 20s. Yeah, I either was 20 or was like 19, and it's like I gotta put this in such a way so that people will understand it and people will learn it. As I'm working on this, I'm trying to puzzle it out, which is one of the reasons why I chose to write underneath a pseudonym, because it wasn't it wasn't about me. It was about the information I was sharing. It was about figuring things out and providing a different perspective for other people to look at and to possibly learn from. And they can't do that if they're like, oh, who's this guy? This is some 19-year-old kid. Who let this guy out of the basement, kind of a thing. And as long as the information is good, you are kind of like the avatar of that information at that time. It just goes through you. And there are certain people who think that ideas and other things have a life of their own, and they just find someone who's open enough to it to be able to spread it.
Right.
Whether that's true or not, I think it's like, as long as the information is good, it really doesn't matter who I'm learning it from.
Right. And that's a major thing I guess people really have struggled with in today's age now is, well, how do I know the information that I'm getting, if it's accurate or not? Because I was literally just talking about this last night with some of my friends, because one of my friends, I'm a moderator in the Michaela Peterson and Jordan Peterson Telegram groups. So we have like a moderator chat, and one of the moderators, at least an acquaintance, I would consider her, posted a link to a documentary about how the MMR vaccine appears to be leading to to an increase in autism just like within a week after getting the shot. And I was immediately like because it's been a rough couple of months, and I was just like overwhelmed by the fact, like, holy cow, how the heck do I know if this is real, if it's true, whether it's factually based, because you've got an entire culture that says vaccines are safe and effective, and if you don't take them, you're going to murder us all with measles and mumps and rubella. Whereas you've got and my generation and the moms of my generation, which, by the way, my generation being Gen Z, like, so the moms of my generation are starting to look at things and be like, I don't know if I trust medical intervention anymore. I don't know if I trust pills for acid reflux. I don't know if I trust antibiotics. In fact, antibiotics are one of the worst things you can give a person nowadays. And there was a study published by, I say, conventional doctors and, like, the pediatricians or whatever, and they found that, hey, well, if you give your patients antibiotics, especially more than once, they will have a massive increase in gut health issues, which then means they're more likely to have depression or anxiety or OCD or things like that. Just it rolls down rapidly how many health issues you get from a messed up gut biome. But doctors never really considered that before because, hey, like, let
It
me give
works.
you it's something that's going to kill everything in your gut, and then you're going to be fine. Well, it's not how it works because it kills everything. It kills the
Yeah.
good and the bad, which
Yeah.
means the bad is designed to overpopulate faster than the good is designed to grow back. That's just how good versus evil works. You see it anywhere in the world where if you knock out the good, evil quickly sweeps in and it takes forever to push it back out. Like it just ISIS,
It
for
takes
example.
a severe intervention in order to rectify it. And so in one of my religious gatherings, end of 2021, there's a couple of talks because at religious conventions there's always it's a place of sharing of ideas, and people look to others give them answers that they may not have thought of, or to do talks that they're concerned about. It's like, because there's a lot of things that are concerning in the world today, and we need to arm ourselves with information, and good information, in order to make the best decisions.
Right.
One of the questions was how to legally essentially fight not having a vaccination, and fight that requirement. And we've heard talks about people setting up concentration camps in certain locations for people who are unvaccinated.
Right.
And the concerns over that, it's like, I have a number of people. I know a lot of people who have been vaccinated, and generally most of them think that, you know what, we had the vaccine, it seems fine, we're getting the boosters, we're doing all that other stuff, but you do you, honey boo, kind of a thing. It's like, you should have that choice. And then we go back to that question of, what about the people who think I should not have a choice? And one of the questions was like, because it's more Christian religion minded, it's like, is this the mark of the beast? Is this the initiation of the one world order? It's like, well, I can see how people are getting to that conclusion, because it sounds really similar. It's like, if it's not that thing, it's a precursor or a dry run or something, because I can see all the hallmarks that they're talking about kind of factoring into this. And the question of it was essentially, it came down to, how am I going to save myself? That was really the question that they were asking. And if we look from the biblical perspective, like we're supposed to at the religious convention, it says, he who tries to save his life will lose it, and he who lays down his life for my sake will take it up again, or something along those lines. It's been a while since I read the verse.
How does that work in modern day? Like, am I supposed to be put in a concentration camp for not getting vaccinated, or am I supposed to get a bunch of shotguns and kill everybody who comes and tries to put me away?
Yeah, and the part of a lot of what modern Christianity is today, oops, sorry about that, my bottle just fell off, is that the Sunday Christians, the ones who are just kind of just there for the social club, and who don't necessarily put a lot of thought into their faith and other things, a lot of it has been infected by hippieism.
Yeah.
And the ideas from the 1970s of absolutely no violence. But yet when we look in the Old Testament, we look in even depictions of Christ in Revelation, there is definitely some war going on there, and there's some horrible happenings for evil people, and those who wish to oppose God.
Right.
And I consider myself to be a rather peaceful individual. I don't want to kill anyone. I don't want to unnecessarily harm individuals. However, I am totally okay with throwing down with somebody if the need calls for it. I just prefer that I exhaust every other option before that. And it's one of the reasons why I'm actually trying to write a book called A Guide to Violence and Its Tools, to understand why people kill each other, how people kill each other, the methods and the things, because there's a lot of concern people have over inanimate objects when they really should be concerned about people.
Right. Like, it's not the gun that kills, it's the person.
Yeah, like I'm holding right now. I don't know if you people can see it right now, but
yeah, they can see it.
Okay. This is a Grail Knife to me. This is something I've wanted for years. This is a K-Bar M2 fighting utility knife. And I think this thing is super cool and great. And I've wanted one for years. Now I finally have it. And it's such a blessing because I understand it better, because you can look at pictures of this and not really understand it.
Right.
Once you get it in hand, it's like, oh, there's a little bit more that goes into this. There's a little bit of skill and thought that goes into every single inch of this knife.
Mm-hmm.
Is important. There's something to it, from the with grip to the angle of the edge to the little nuances of the blade. And this is a fighting utility knife. People have killed other people with knives exactly like this since World War II
Mm-hmm.
and beyond. And it all comes down to the intent. It can open crates. It can be used as a tool. It can be used as a hammer. It can build camp. It can be used to butcher game. It can also be used to butcher people.
Right.
And the for you and me, I think it's very clear that whoever is wielding the blade is the problem, whether there's a problem or not. But for other people, they think this is the embodiment of death and destruction, and it should not cast it into the fire and destroy it. Otherwise, Sauron will come back and destroy us all, kind of a thing. It's like it's if I toss this on the ground, nothing's gonna happen except it's on the ground until somebody picks it up.
Mm-hmm.
And people act like I'm shoving this knife into somebody's neck if I'm not wearing a mask.
Right.
And I'm at the point where it's just like, if you think that is violence, you have a extremely narrow idea of what violence is.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people out there who've experienced violence, who've seen it, who've lived through it, and they're horribly scarred from it.
Yeah.
And to say that seeing somebody, actually being able to see somebody's face is somehow violence. Well, first of all, I don't think anyone has looks that bad, but
No, I would disagree. There's definitely some people out there where if I look at that, I'm like, I can't unsee that ever.
True.
But
However,
not to be facetious.
It's a lot different than
Right, it is. Getting stabbed by a knife is far more traumatizing than seeing somebody's face and thinking, "Oh my gosh, it's a grandma killer." Like, you have to be incredibly brainwashed to think this person is not wearing a mask. This person is a young person not wearing a mask. They're a threat to me, my mother, my mother's mother, and everybody else that I know, all the way down to my 8-year-old son. And if you look, like, just statistically, you look at it, it's like, no, I'm not a risk to you or anybody.
Yeah. And I collect knives, if that hasn't been clear.
I love
there
knives.
are
Yeah, man.
Yeah. So this one right here is another Grail knife that I have. This is a Fairbairn Sykes British Commando knife.
Mm-hmm.
And people think a lot of knives are designed to be weapons. This is one of the only ones that I know of that was developed in the 30s or 40s that is designed just to kill people.
Mm-hmm.
This was designed for elimination of enemy sentries in the most brutal and efficient way possible. But everyone thinks that that's the knife people are going to be carrying or using, when instead it's going to be something like this lowly paring knife.
Yeah, the dinky little thing that you would have to really sharpen up well to be useful.
Oh no! So the interesting part of it is that most knife related crimes would outweigh knife related, or sorry, rifle or shotgun related crimes are done with household kitchen knives, because they are sharpened in such a way and they have an edge in such a way that they can work really well on meat. And it just so happens that people are made out of meat. And if it can cut chicken and if it can cut beef really well, those tends to be a little bit denser in muscle tone than humans. And it works really well on people too. And it's a fascinating study to go into that I really should finish that book, because it's so unbelievably gruesome, but yet it's fascinating to me. And people don't like to look at it. And it actually helped me a little bit in a line of work that I was going to be doing. For the early part of COVID, I was part of a life insurance agency. And so we had to talk about death and destruction all the goddamn time. I'm sorry that one slipped out. But the part of what the pitch that I had to do is like, hey, man, you're going to die someday. Let's make sure your family is taken care of. And that was all it was. And I could deal with that, because I think about disaster preparedness and prepping and all those other things as part of my job for a long time, even before I was doing it professionally, because I grew up in the shadow of Y2K and the world's coming to an end kind of
Right.
thing. And it's a little comforting because the world that I was raised to live in really isn't here yet. The end of the world, it might be the end of the world, but a lot of people are raised on the idea everything's getting better. Everything's slowly but surely getting better. It's like when you look outside and you think about everything slowly getting better, it really doesn't look like it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we look at social media, especially if we listen to the news, it's like everything seems to be getting a little worse. So if I'm being told in the future everything's going to be great and perfect and it's going to get there, but yet I see everything getting bad and worse and terrible, it starts to kind of shake your faith a little bit. But if you're told it's going to get worse, it's going to be bad, and then it's going to be good, that's a little bit more believable.
Right.
And it galvanizes you that for that hard time.
Right.
That Go ahead.
Biblically, we're as Christians, we are told to prepare for all manner of hardships that are to come, and
Yeah.
that as we get closer to the end of times, as we get closer to Jesus returning and rescuing the church, we're going to get closer to more violence and more government overreach, things like that. And God and Jesus both several times within the New Testament very specifically said, you need to be prepared. You need to have your house set in order. You need to have your affairs set in order. You need to be ready and be ready to be ready for the day I come back. Because when that
Yeah.
happens, you will not be expecting it's going to happen out of the blue. You're not going to, I can hear the signs that's going to,
Yeah.
things are going to
Yeah.
happen. The moon is going to die, things like that. But you don't know when I'm coming. It could be 500 years after the moon dies that I come back. You don't know
Yeah.
that. You have to be prepared and ready. And that doesn't mean you need to have a shotgun and a trailer full of canned beans,
Yeah.
though that is always very useful to have.
Yeah.
The beans.
Yeah.
I hope you have some ventilation in that trailer. But
Ooh. Ooh. So that was the situation, the intro to the talk that I absolutely am still livid about at that religious convention. Started off with beans and bullets aren't going to solve a bad situation. It's like, well, if we look at history, if we look at just how much conflict there has been and how many times an evil regime just within the last 200 years has been defeated with beans and bullets, it makes me question just how much that individual understands. This is an older man, someone who I should be looking up to listen to the wisdom and the experience that is there. But when I've dealt with something that he's talking about firsthand, and had an entirely different outcome than what he's saying will happen, I start to be like, why are you lying to these people? So for a little bit more context, the speaker was talking about the legal ways in order to be able to resist the vaccine. Says, well, if you use this and this, uh, things like religious exemption, and you use uh, these legal papers, they'll just leave you alone. And this is something that I had to live through in the early 2000s. My family and I tried to do something similar, on the borderlines of the sovereign citizen movement. That we said that we did not want to have a rather tyrannical government over us. We did not accept the way that things were going at the time, and we tried to get out of the system, as it were. And this is something that I generally don't talk to people about because it's still very touchy. Some of
Right.
it's because people will consider it borderline illegal. Some of it was considered borderline illegal, despite the fact that it was working within the law itself.
Mhm.
And we went through that. We lost blood, treasure, peace of mind, and all over a 10-year period. And it's been probably 10 or so years since that happened. And it's like we lived in Illinois still, and the place we were trying to file all these lawsuits in um, is officially considered one of the largest criminal organizations, but it's a county.
Mhm.
And so going there, getting advice from some of like the best lawyers in the field for stuff like that, and then getting a boot shoved so far up our colon we are still dealing with aftermath of that today, even after we started to comply and go back into the system. Is very sobering to hear somebody say, if you do these things, you have 100% success and they'll just leave you alone. It's like, I've been through that. You are setting somebody up for failure. You are naive to think that people who aren't even playing by the rules they claim to be playing by are going to accept a single piece of paper or even a huge stack of pieces of paper to stop them. Because, like you said before, once evil proliferates and proliferates so quickly, it's going to take a lot of effort to get it to stop. And we saw this in just before the First World War, or no, not the First World. Yeah, actually, there was the First World War. There was essentially a treaty that was essentially, we're not going to fight each other. It's okay. And Jeremy's like, that's just a piece of paper. I have a bayonet. And that precedes most conflicts in the world. It's like, hey, we've got laws to say that it's bad to kill people and that we shouldn't be fighting. Well, I want to fight, so I'm just going to ignore that.
Right. Because laws are only followed by law-abiding citizens. Like if you don't care about the law and if you have a desire for something else, you're going to break that.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to break that law regardless. It's really interesting how, like, the pitch you gave me was religion related, and
Mm-hmm.
we've jumped around. We've hit on COVID. We've hit on things like
Religion,
that.
politics, everything, and it's all intertwined that we
Mhm.
can't really separate it. And I feel like we're starting to wrap up just a little bit. I also want to mention one thing.
Yeah.
If you're a Christian, if you believe in Christ or some variation of it, like I do, you have to remember Christianity was illegal for most of its history, wherever it was founded and wherever it was practiced. If you are using the law of a country to judge your morality, you need to reconsider what it is to be a follower of Christ, because merely his existence and saying the kingdom of God is near was against the law at the time. So if you think it's absolutely wrong to break the law, you are not going to follow Christ in regards to living like he lived.
Right. So that I had two final questions that I figured I'd throw out there. One is, well, you have a blog, I have a podcast, but that's just speech, right? That's like, here, this is what we could do or should do or definitely should do. I was one of the guests I was on, I think Jordan Peterson's podcast that I was listening to, was talking about how nowadays there are so many activists, but they're activists in the form of podcasts and blogs.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy said, well, it's not a bad thing to have a podcast. It's not a bad thing to have a blog. But where is your action? What is the action step you're taking here? Are you protesting? Are you calling your local representative? What are you doing that's taking your speech to the next step? And that's something I've actually struggled with the podcast is I love talking to people. I love speech. I love everything about communicating verbally.
Mm-hmm.
However, when the time comes, will I take the action? And secondarily, what am I doing now? What is the action I'm putting in to change not just myself, but the places I live in? Like, is there any action that I can take? What is the action I'm taking? Because I don't want to be the type of person who goes stumping my fist on the table and saying, this is what we should be doing. Look how bad the world is, and just ranting about how bad the world is. And then when somebody goes, okay, so here's what we can do to fix it, I'm just like, I guess.
Yeah. So I take care of my family. I make sure that they're okay, and I try to live as peaceful a life as possible. I do not wear a mask when I go into supermarkets, even if it's posted now. I used to do it if it's posted, but I decided, you know what? If I don't think this is right, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
So, well, I don't necessarily go into as many stores as I do, because sometimes when I go shopping, I go with my mother because it's bonding time and she likes to shop.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes she takes a long time, so I sit and wait in the car. But when I do go into stores, I don't wear a mask. And when I see somebody look at me not wearing a mask, I give them a big smile because I want to appear to be as friendly an individual as possible so that they couldn't ever be mad at me,
Mhm.
because instead of being a mean mugging SOB, being like, yeah, look at me, I'm breaking your rules, I want to show that I don't care about your rules, but I still want to be friendly with you. I want
Mhm.
to extend the branch of peace and avoid as much trouble as possible. And part of my job is I deal with self-defense and firearms and all that stuff, and in writing. And one of the things that a lot of the training goes into is avoiding conflicts,
Mhm.
so that you don't have to use your weapons or anything else that you might be packing with you. And that's the tried and true method of, it's like, it's not worth it. And some of the prison talks that I've been listening to is like, in prison is entirely different, because if you have a problem with somebody, sometimes it's like you have to beat on them, or it escalates so much that there's no chance to beat on them. If you have a problem with them, you have to stab them. And it's like, just mind your own business. That was the thrust of at least that part. So live your life as true as you can be, play by as many rules as you can. And if some of those rules go against your morality, ignore them.
Right.
Don't be an ass about it, because in religious circles, there's enough asses to go around. And even outside of it, there are too many people who are negative and ass-like in their behavior and jerks for really no apparent reason. Be that little positive light in somebody's life. Give somebody a compliment, smile, be nice to somebody. They could be having a really crappy day.
Right.
You just
That,
might be a rebel in doing that.
yeah, no, yeah, there aren't a lot of people going around out there smiling and a lot of people are just overwhelmed by the weight of the world. Several of my coworkers are just it's interesting that a lot of people who work at places like convenience stores, they either tend to be really down to earth or all they can think about is how messed up the world is. Um,
A lot of time
there's
to think. A lot of time to think.
there's an interesting divide between the guys who will work fuel because it's the state of New Jersey, so you have to there it's illegal to pump your own fuel. Um, yeah,
That's very odd in my
no,
opinion,
it's
but
New Jersey and Oregon. Yeah, it's state law. But when we pump fuel, we don't care. Like if somebody gets out of the car to pump their own fuel, like go ahead, man, I don't care. Uh, but the guys who work fuel typically have all types of other ways to bring in income outside of their job there at that convenience store or that fuel station. Whereas on the inside, most of those people have accepted the fact that they're going to be working at a place like Walmart for the rest of their lives. So they might as well get as many hours in as they can. And it's been something I've been trying to balance out because I don't want to be working at a convenience store for the rest of my life. That doesn't pay enough money for me to live a life where I can provide for a family or afford other things. Well, at the same time, balancing it between I really shouldn't be pursuing money. So where's the balance here?
yeah.
But a lot of people, uh, the whole premise of this episode was religion is being ousted and in its place is coming other religions in the form of like COVID or science or atheism. What do you think what do you think are consequences of a lack of true religion, a true spirituality, as you used that word?
True spirituality gives a sense of peace.
Mhm.
We were Bible study yesterday. I give you the peace, not as the world understands it, but something else. I forget the exact
Yeah.
verse, but it's you. If you look at people who are like really in touch with their spiritual side, we in ancient times, humans were thought to be made up of three things: a physical side, a spiritual side, and a unification between the two.
Mhm.
And this was traditionally viewed as one's individual blood as the unification between spirit and physicality, or the soul. This was considered the soul.
Mhm.
We are so concerned today with just the physical side of things: eating, sleeping, entertainment, physical pleasures, everything else, that we're ignoring the spiritual side, which people nowadays would consider to be mental health.
Right. But
But even then,
that leaves a massive gap in there
yeah,
for other things.
but even then, mental health is not necessarily spiritual in and of
Mhm.
itself. It's what runs us. Yes, it's extremely important. But if we stop feeding the soul, feeding the spirit of us, it starts to wither up and die. And you can see someone who's been put through the ringer and who has no spiritual side. They're husks of people. And you're starting to see a lot of that, especially with the dead, lifeless eyes of people who have been wearing this mask for 2 years straight, in theory. And people who don't care, who have that touch of the spirit in them, they're just like, they're like golden retrievers. There's one woman who I know. She's recently gotten married. They're expecting their first child. It's an amazing thing. She's literally sunshine embodied. Like every time I've ever encountered her, it's always been peppy smiles, and it's just like literal light shines from her. She is just that nice of a person, and that's, I think, a lot of what you're missing. If people not necessarily enjoy your company because of what you provide them, but because of your personality, because of how positive you are. Positivity comes from that spiritual source. Thinking of something that is infinitely greater than you, having a purpose infinitely greater than you that you can try to strive for. It's kind of like the daddy complex. You want to please dad, you want to please someone in authority, and if you find something that is really greater than yourself and have something that's not self-focused, that starts to feed your spirit and your soul. And I've squared this away with myself years ago. I do nice things for people, not necessarily because I like people or because it's the right thing to do, but I feel good about it. And it's a little bit selfish in doing that. But if I do something for somebody else and they benefit from it and I benefit from it, it's like the best form of selfishness, because it's effort put outside of myself, but I benefit from it because I feel good. I don't necessarily need to tell anyone. It's like, you know what? I'm going to be nice to somebody today. I'm going to hopefully make somebody's life better, even if it's just because sometimes I do streaming on Twitch and things like I just hang out. I get a couple of viewers. I spend time with friends on it. And it's like, hey, if you want to come here and hang out and just forget about COVID, 2 hours, 3 hours, just to have a little window of sunshine amongst all the clouds, even for 5 minutes, I think I've done something good in my life, that I helped you enjoy maybe just 5 minutes of a really crappy day, or maybe a really crappy week. If you come in and I've somehow benefited you in some way, even if it's just to lift your spirits, because sometimes let's be honest, when you're down, somebody coming in and being like, "Hey, buddy, how's it going?" They come in, they smile, and they pat you on the back, even if they just BS with you for like a couple of minutes. It's like, you know what, the day isn't so bad, compared to someone, oh man, screw you. Great. You just a ray of sunshine, pal. But yeah, that's the simple thing. It's simple to say it. It's hard to carry it out, because before we actually started recording, I mentioned that I was tired. I didn't sleep all that well. Maybe had a little bit too much to drink last night, but I'm still here. I'm still trying to do stuff, and I'll do a little bit of a pitch for myself again. If you want me to bring that same benefit in, like advertising, emails, marketing stuff, let me know. I can you can help Joseph here with the stuff, because I'll give him a little cut. No, I don't. That's not necessarily the deal, but I think it's be appreciative of it so I can help him out. If you want me to help you reach your customers and reach people and be a benefit to them, I want to help you help other people. And as long as we keep trying to help each other, because this goes back to the other thing that we were talking about. We saw an increase in tribalism during COVID. People need to come together in their communities and help each other out. Whether that community is actually in the same area, that'd be beneficial. Or if it's like an online community, we need to take care of each other, and we need to help make sure everyone makes it to tomorrow, the day after. Because someday somebody's not going to make it, and we can't save everyone, but we should at least try.
Yeah. Seems like a great way to close out the podcast. Thank you, Trent, for sharing your thoughts with us, man.
Oh, I've had a great time. If you ever need anyone again to do this, let me know and I can make some time.
You got it, man. All right, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast, and hopefully this has been thought provoking in some way, shape, or form. Again, Trent, thank you for showing up.
Mhm.
And this has been the Wandering Thoughts podcast. Until next time, keep thinking, living, and loving.